People that have witnessed someone nearly pass away due to their actions, what were they doing? When we were young, around 12ish, I watched my cousin attempt to cross a very busy street with very poor judgment. I still can't, to this day, believe what I saw. He made it halfway across and somehow got spun around, whether by his own survival reflex or maybe he got clipped by a passing car just right. But he never broke his running stride and ended up next to me where he started. This idiot looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Oh, cool, you made it too. That wasn't the best idea." And I, jaw dropped, had to explain to him what the hell just happened. Yeah, "you made it too" is pretty insane. Story 2. When I was 11 or 12 years old, my little brother sucked down a hard candy while we stood in the hallway in our house. He immediately grabbed his throat and his eyes widened in panic. He couldn't say anything and his tongue kept darting out of his mouth. I got behind him and performed the world's most poorly formed but extremely forceful Heimlich maneuver. The candy shot out of his mouth. He was fine, and true to form, my parents didn't believe the episode ever happened. I still resent that, but I'm thankful that the Boy Scouts taught me how. Story 3. My brothers and I are in the back seat. We're 3, 4, and 6 years old at the time. My older brother to my left and my younger brother to my right. We're all dressed up because, well, it's Halloween. And we're on the way back from trick-or-treating in town. My younger brother is dressed as the devil, and he's fiddling with the door. I tell him to stop, and he looks back at me through his devil mask and stops for a moment, then goes back to fiddling with the door. I'm in the middle of ratting him out to my parents when the door opens and my brother is gone. Luckily, a few things worked in his favor. This is Canada, so Halloween in my part of the country meant there was already snow on the ground. This is rural prairie, so we're on a dirt road with ditches on either side. The road is about a car and a half wide and the shoulder is tiny, if it exists at all, so no curbs and no extra concrete to your head into. So basically, he rolled out of the car and landed in a soft pillow of snow in the ditch. When we got back to him, he was perfectly fine except for the fact his devil mask was slightly askew. He was super lucky. Story 4. I grabbed a marzipan candy from a kid who had a severe nut allergy just as he was about to eat it. The teacher who gave it to him didn't know what marzipan is made of, almonds. I had vivid worries for years afterward about what would have happened if I'd been there a few seconds late. I was an assistant teacher and I had stepped out to grab cleaning supplies and an extra tray of sliced watermelon since a little girl had dropped the ones we had on the floor. I went outside the classroom and my thoughts went like this. Will the kids even want to eat watermelon? It's a birthday party. There's cake and candies. Do kids even like marzipan? Oh wait, marzipan. Then I dashed back like a mad woman and arrived right on time. LOL. Story 5. I watched an unsupervised toddler fall into the pool at a party when I was around 9. A mother who jumped in and pulled him out couldn't swim but acted purely out of maternal instinct when she saw this unknown toddler slip below the surface. Luckily, the child had fallen in the shallow end, so both the toddler and the mother were okay. However, the family whose toddler fell in were kicked out of the party for not supervising their children and not being in the pool area when their kids were. The toddler's parents were too busy drinking and having fun to even care that their youngest almost drowned. I think I was more traumatized than they were because it was unsettling to watch the child being pulled out and then seeing them given first aid until they recovered. Story 6. My oldest child has had 2 very serious medical scares in their 12.5 years of life. The first time was when they were just an hour old and I was nursing them. They suddenly had trouble breathing and turned blue. They then fought hard against having IVs and kept pulling them out, also trying to remove the baby CPAP machine. Then, at age 10, a vessel burst 10 days after a tonsillectomy. The tonsils were removed after they had strep throat for 7 months straight, which caused a whole host of other problems too. They experienced a significant loss of red liquid at the first ER before being transferred to a trauma center where they had emergency surgery. Story 7. I have so many of these moments. I caught a friend's 3-year-old as he was walking between a bonfire and where people were sitting. He stepped up onto a log and the log started to roll toward the fire. I somehow managed to catch him, first with my leg and then with my hands. It was entirely instinct. I didn't think about it at all. I just suddenly found us both on the ground. He was very scared but did not get burned. He was wearing a large polyester coat, so that would have gone poorly. Now that I have little kids myself, it is a good reminder for fire safety. Story 8. I watched a mate fall out of a tree as he was trying to untie a rope swing. He hit the base of the tree, which knocked him unconscious, and he landed face down, floating in the river. He would have drowned if he had been alone. I jumped in and managed to hold his head above water until I started sinking in the silt, at which point friends just yanked him out by the arms. He soon regained consciousness, but went into shock. We managed to get him across the river and into a mate's mom's car, a Ford Fiesta, and off to the hospital. He had a neck and back injury where he hit the tree roots and he couldn't get out of the car. The rescue crew are considering cutting the roof off. In the end, they folded down the back seats, reclined the front seat, got a board under him with a neck brace, and slid him out of the hatchback. Story 9. So this was me. My cousin and I were roughhousing in the pool. He landed on top of me and held me under the water, causing me to start drowning. I inhaled a bunch of water and went from panic to a strange calmness. Luckily, I happened to see a ladder close by before I lost consciousness. I grabbed it and used it to pull myself up and get my head above water, which got him off of me. I coughed up water for a bit, but was fine after that. There was also the time I nearly choked on calamari. My parents and sisters were sitting right across from me, but they didn't know I was in distress. Luckily, I quickly drank my beverage, which dislodged it. Story 10. An acquaintance in the past was unlucky and had the opposite experience when falling from a height. He was extremely intoxicated and tried to climb over a metal fence that was blocking a sheer 4-meter drop. He swung himself over the other side and fell about 6 meters in total, but instead of letting himself go limp, he braced his legs and knees. The resulting impact caused severe damage to both of his ankles, knees, and lower legs. To his credit, he was certainly disoriented after that. He was rolling around on the ground, seemingly amused and wondering why his legs weren't working. That didn't last long. You can probably imagine the panic he displayed in the ambulance once the adrenaline had worn off. The acquaintance's friend went to the hospital with him. The emergency doctors had to adjust his legs before they could give proper treatment. The doctors told the friend plainly, "He's getting ketamine. Now the thing you'll notice about ketamine is that your friend is going to scream very loudly, but he's not going to remember it." He certainly did scream. He screamed something primal. His legs did recover from the damage because he's one of the luckiest people in the world. But suffice to say, he's more careful with alcohol these days. Story 11. We were all teenagers living out in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. We were doing what we always did, having a nice bonfire, a few drinks, good music, etc. on this nice man's farm. He let us use it. A few of the guys were horsing around as usual, except one guy tripped. When he tripped, he was reaching out to grab onto anything he could so he wouldn't land in the fire. As he was falling and grabbing, he accidentally pushed one of the other guys straight into the flames. His whole body ended up in the massive pit, and we were all freaking out. A couple of us grabbed the only cell phone around. This was before cell phones were popular. We didn't even have the Nokia brick yet, and called for help. A few others dragged him out and got hurt in the process. I'll never forget the smell or the way he looked. He seemed awake, but distant. EMS arrived very quickly, considering our remote location. Cops came, and there was a lot of chaos and crying. Surprisingly, no one ran. The cops confiscated our drinks after taking our statements, drove us home, and told us they weren't going to ticket us because we might have saved our friend's life. They did, however, state multiple times that they hope we remember this whenever we drink near a fire, and we did and do. Our friend survived, but it was a close call. He had expressed multiple times how he struggled after the accident. He looked similar to Nicky Lauda. Nobody ever bullied him. He was one of the sweetest guys both before and after the accident. Unfortunately, because of the pain he was in during recovery, along with depression and other medical issues from the accident, he became fixated to pain medication. About 2 years ago, I read that he passed away from a suspected coating out at the local lake. The friend who accidentally pushed him wasn't doing much better. He lived with the guilt for years. He never drank after that, but he became a bitter, angry, self-destructive, depressed man. He stayed friends with our buddy and vowed to make it after him. If our friend had any mean bone in his body, he could have easily taken advantage of that, but he never did. The other guy took his own life a few years ago. There were other personal issues that compounded his mental state. He passed away tragically. Ironically, he set his house on fire on purpose. When he found his wife departed, she had health issues, called the cops, taunted them when they arrived, and passed away by ending it all before anyone could reach him. Story 12. I saved a kid from passing out face first into a fire pit. I was up at some cabins I used to go to every year with a group of old friends. There was a big, nice family in the cabin next to us celebrating a kid's 19th birthday. They were Canadian, and in Canada, the drinking age is 19, so they got him extremely intoxicated. Everyone eventually went to bed, but the kid stayed up with us since we were a younger crowd than his family, and he didn't want to stop hanging out. Eventually, my group filtered out one by one, but I felt bad because this kid was completely intoxicated, yet he just wanted to stay up by the fire, so I stuck around. I honestly thought the worst thing that could happen to him was that he would fall asleep outside and risk getting hypothermia due to the cold after the fire went out. The kid was staring at the fire, and before I knew it, his eyes closed and he just collapsed forward. He literally just passed out just like that. Thankfully, I was sitting on a wood log pretty close to him. I launched myself so fast I couldn't tell you what I was thinking. The kid was huge, over 6 feet, and I just slammed into him like a missile. I still thought that we were going to fall into the fire. I'm 5'6", but back then I was absolutely tiny. I was a size 0, and my doctor and family were constantly on my case trying to get me to gain weight. Thankfully, we fell to the side of the fire, and I still had to pull him away to prevent us from getting burned. I ran back into my cabin and got help. We carried the kid back to his cabin and tried to wake somebody up to tell them, but they were all asleep. I have vivid memories for a long time about what would have happened if I hadn't been there. Story 13. I have a history of hiking unprepared and saving the unprepared. I worked in parks for most of my 20s. I myself almost had a major incident on the Middle Teton when I slipped on an ice field and fell into a narrow space against a rock face. I had to shimmy my way up about 15 feet of snow and a rock in a crevice that was maybe 2 feet wide. If I had broken a bone in that fall, it would have been dire. I also rescued more than one person who was ill prepared and insisted on joining me for a backpacking trip into the desert. I had to call a helicopter to save one person, and the other I had to carry back to the car with a friend because she was suffering from heat stroke. Both were experiencing severe heat-related illness, but we had to personally carry one of them back since we couldn't easily get help. One incident was in the Grand Canyon in 2015, and the other was in Big Bend in 2018. Story 14. I was rubbernecking on I-80 in the Midwest, where people are normally driving over 80 miles per hour. Two police cars had someone pulled over. A guy in a sedan veered into the center lane from the left, 2 cars ahead of me. He hit a van, which immediately lifted onto 2 wheels, shot across the lane to the right, before flipping a few times and landing on top of one of the police cars with an officer inside. This launched the police car about 30 feet into the ditch. I somehow managed to drive through the chaos completely unscathed. The man in the sedan and the man in the van and the officer were all visibly injured. The back half of the police car was severely damaged. I checked that everyone was conscious and alive, then left as helicopters were approaching to take people to the hospital. Story 15. Not exactly quote-unquote his own actions, but the bespectacled, nerdy freshman at the end lab bench during our organic chemistry class at UIUC 1992 nearly passed away when the freshman next to him poured waste liquid down the shared drain. The waste chemicals mixed in the drain to create potassium cyanide, which pooled in the end drain and sent vapor upward. The nerdy freshman started to wheeze, a shallow wheeze like having the wind knocked out of him. He doubled over, his eyes and nose streaming clear fluids, and his face turned a disturbing reddish purple. The Slavic grad assistant knew exactly what was happening, shouted to clear the lab, and administered some sort of breathing mask. The nerdy freshman was okay, though I expect he had a rough couple of days recovering, and the guy up the bench received a severe reprimand for dumping liquids down the drain against lab rules. That student oddly didn't seem very guilty or troubled about it. Story 16. Substances. I used to enjoy recreational substances, and so did my friends. A bunch of them nearly passed away, including me, from accidental coding. Others escalated to stronger ones. I don't really know what happened to them, I just know a couple are in rehab. Another one is on the streets, and one tragically ended it all after taking someone else's life. One of them actually passed away. Just like me, he accidentally took a pill from a batch he shouldn't have touched. I was just luckier than him. His organs failed and he passed away 3 days later. The sad part is, it was his first time trying it. It's like an and then there were none type of situation. People think substances are fun and all, and they really are until they're not. The best thing that happened to me was this near-doom experience because it got me away from that group of friends faster than anything else could have. Story 17. I was on holiday in Tallinn, Estonia, and hired one of the electric scooters to explore the area quicker. I was coming up to a crossing way too fast and hadn't tested how the brakes on the scooters worked before. I tried to brake, but it barely did anything until I pulled hard, and the abrupt stop threw me into the road in front of an SUV. Thank goodness the driver was paying attention because the view of the crossing was blocked by a bush until just before the road. I got up with a couple of scrapes and bruises, apologized to the guy, and thanked him for avoiding me. Then I walked back to the hotel while trying to manage a rising sense of panic. Story 18. I can't say she would have passed away, but it certainly would have not been good. A girl in 11th grade chemistry class during an experiment with Bunsen burners went to light the gas. However, she did not attach the actual burner to the gas nozzle, so she literally lit the gas shooting out into the room. Thankfully, she had great reflexes and jumped out of the way of the jet of fire that came towards her. Equally fortunately, the teacher wasn't paying attention, so she didn't get in trouble, but she would have taken the flame directly to the face if she had been slower. Story 19. Does listening count? I'm a 911 operator, so I got a lot of these, but here's a lighter one. Recently, I took a call for a vehicle crash with no injuries that was on the highway. I told the caller to move the vehicle out of the road if safe to do so, and he stated that he's going to get out and help block traffic before the police get there because his car was immovable. Once I realized what he meant, I was trying to tell him, please don't get out of your car and go stand in the middle of the road. Because what on earth? He insisted it was fine. He didn't want anyone to hit his car. Then there was a loud sound of a vehicle passing quickly, the painful screech of brakes, and a holy smokes from the guy who almost got hit by a semi-truck. He got away from the road after that. Preemptively, please don't be too hard on the poor guy. Getting into a car crash will flood you with a huge load of adrenaline, and you never know how you'll react. I think he was just trying to take control of the situation in whatever way he could, no matter how illogical. Story 20. I was whitewater rafting with friends. As we were going through a class 4 rapid, we noticed a person struggling in the water. We were frantically looking for him, trying to get him into our boat, but he disappeared under the water for what felt like a long time. Suddenly, he popped up right next to me, and I stuck my paddle out. He grabbed it, and it took most of us to pull him into the boat. I can't believe we didn't flip our raft while trying to rescue him. We dropped him off with his friends after the rapid, and he refused to get back in their boat. His friends didn't seem to think it was a big deal at all, but he was visibly shaken, hyperventilating, and repeatedly saying, "I almost just passed away." Story 21. 911 operator here. I already commented with something a little lighter, but here's something more serious. I received a call from a depressed person who wanted to tell someone where to find his body after he jumped off a bridge. I started trying to talk him down. Suddenly, I heard a gentle tap as he set his phone down, followed by nothing but the sound of the wind. I knew he had jumped. And then I heard one of the most pain screams I've ever heard, which is saying something from some distance away from the phone. The fall hadn't been fatal, nor had it injured him enough to knock him unconscious. However, it did enough damage to leave him in a state of intense pain and immobility. The paramedic said the fall quite honestly should have been fatal, but he landed in such a way that he did not complete the attempt. So yeah, that actually happens a lot. Story 22. My family and I were on vacation in Costa Rica. We went on ATVs and everything was going well. My parents asked my sister and me if we wanted to try driving them. My sister went up a hill and fell off. As I watched my sister and dad fall, I had a moment of intense fear. They landed and I came running, feeling very distressed. Both my dad and sister ended up with only minor scrapes, cuts, and bruises. They were wearing helmets, so their heads were fine too. Had they not been wearing one, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 23. At my local skate park, there was an absolutely incredible BMX rider who went up a quarter pipe at speed. His front tire popped and the back grind peg spun and struck the front of his head. It was a truly shocking sight. He was put into a medically induced coma for a couple of weeks and underwent many operations to reduce pressure in his head. He never fully recovered all his previous function. The park owner later said that if the peg had come out, he likely would have not survived the injury on the spot. I was so happy to have been one of the kids who always wore a helmet. Story 24. A motorcyclist splitting lanes through stopped traffic hit an SUV that was turning left across the lanes. The SUV was barely moving, but the motorcyclist was traveling at least 30 miles per hour. I got out to render aid and call 911. The man, clearly in shock, kept trying to get up, and it took two people to hold him down and convince him to stop moving while we waited for the EMT. He ended up losing the entire leg from just above the knee. I know because I was a witness in the lawsuit he brought and lost. The accident was entirely the motorcyclist's fault. The man is still lucky to be alive. His helmet was split in half and landed about 20 feet down the road. Story 25. Back in 2008, I was visiting family in NYC and waiting for a train at the 23rd Street and 6th Avenue stop in Chelsea. There was a woman nearby arguing on her phone while her two toddlers ran around. She wasn't paying attention at all. One child got too close to the edge, and just as we, not their mom, told them to back up, the other one ran toward them, tripped, and fell onto the tracks. My friend, who was closest to them, jumped down immediately, grabbed the child, and handed them to me, all while a train was approaching the stop no more than a football field length away. Luckily, the child was fine for the most part, just shaken up and crying. Instead of thanking us, the mom started yelling at her kids for being quote-unquote careless. We were stunned. We told her straight up it was 100% her fault. I had a 2-year-old at the time, so I was furious. Story 26. Me, I was standing up to stretch my legs on a C-130 after we released paratroopers in cargo during an exercise. The cargo door was still open, and the NCO on the other side of the ramp was yelling something at me, but it was too loud to hear him, so I walked over. He said it again and jabbed his finger toward my seat. Again, I couldn't hear him over the wind. As I leaned close to him, I could hear him say, while pointing to the seat I'd been in, "Go back and sit your rear down right there like you're supposed to." I turned my head toward my seat just as a static line got caught on something. It snapped tight instantly and crushed the bulkhead that would have been directly behind my head if I had been sitting, or at chest level if I'd been standing. I turned back to my NCO and we just looked at each other, back to the crushed bulkhead and back to each other. I clearly heard him say, just sit on this side now. Story 27. I was walking in a large crowd of people downtown during lunch hour, approaching a very wide set of dual electric and silent metro train tracks that had a crossing light. There was an older woman, possibly a little confused or with vision impairment, walking a few steps ahead of me with her head down, not really paying attention. As the crowd approached the red light, which warned us of a coming train, everyone slowed and stopped. The woman, not looking up, kept walking forward. She quickly passed the first set of tracks, which were clear, but all of us on the sidewalk could see a second train approaching in the other direction, which she clearly didn't notice. A few people, myself included, screamed for her to stop. She paused between the tracks, turning away from the coming train to look at us, still not seeing the train. At that moment, a man quickly stepped out and grabbed her shirt, pulling her backward just moments before the train crossed in front of us. 5 seconds more and she would have been hit. I've read many times about the bystander effect, but it wasn't until I experienced it that I understood its power. I'm still frustrated that I didn't act. I was right behind her. Story 28. My oldest daughter was about 18 months old at the time. I was heavily pregnant when she, my husband, and I were taking a walk in the neighborhood and passed in front of her friend's house. She, of course, wanted to go visit, but we weren't about to do that, so we tried to redirect her back onto the sidewalk in the direction we were walking. She just kept going into the yard, and it soon turned into a game between her and my husband. I decided to walk a little ways ahead and stop under a tree in the shade because we were in the sun. When I turned around, I saw the moment where she decided to run straight into the street instead of continuing into the yard, just as a car was driving down the road. It all happened in an instant where I realized there was no way I would reach her in time, and my husband had frozen. It was pure instinct that had me running into the street, screaming at the top of my lungs to stop just as the car was about to reach her. The driver immediately slammed on the brakes and looked at me like I was crazy until I looked down at my daughter running to the opposite side of the car. He followed my line of sight and instantly went pale, seeing her. I scooped her up, took her to the sidewalk, and just cradled her and cried. I was in so much shock. My daughter was fine, and we got ice cream after. She has zero memory of the event, and I still don't trust my husband not to freeze if there's an emergency. Story 29. My husband and any interaction with tools, power, or otherwise, he's not allowed near ladders on his own. It sounds like a joke, but it's serious. I can't tell you how many times over 40 years he's nearly injured or seriously hurt himself. I grew up poor with a dad who did everything and taught his girls how to. My husband's father was the opposite. No disrespect, a dear man, so my husband never learned such things. The problem is, I've tried to teach him, but he has no interest. He still thinks he knows best and won't ask me for help or advice. Last week, he was planning to replace the flag holder on the wooden porch, and I didn't think he could do much damage. I checked the camera 20 minutes later to find he had decided to put it on the garage instead and was trying to hammer a nail into brick with a rubber mallet. Story 30. The guy who lived across from me decided not to call before he dug to put a garden in front of his house. I didn't say anything because I just figured he had. I was playing catch with my son on the road and saw him working. Suddenly, we just heard him yell something like, "What the heck is that?" Then we saw him start jabbing his shovel into the ground like he was trying to break through it. I started wondering about what he was doing. Then, sure enough, his wife came out the front door and yelled something about the power being out, saw what he was doing and screamed at him. The man ran away. And yep, he had hit a power line. I have no idea how he wasn't seriously harmed, but the hydro company, the power company, was there within an hour or two doing repairs. Story 31. It was me. I was on top of a boxcar in a train yard. We were trespassing while filming a student film. The train was about a half-mile long. I went around a bend. We couldn't see the end, but it was stopped and had been there for 3 days. I had mastered jumping from the top of one boxcar to the next, which was required for the film. The tracks were on a berm, which was about 2.5 feet tall, and the boxcar themselves were about 13 feet tall. We were doing a practice jump when, somewhere on the back end of the train, they coupled something up. The shockwave traveled down the train quickly, and I was in the air when it reached us. The car where I was supposed to land shot forward about 3 feet, and the car I had just jumped off of was rolling forward. I was falling between the cars and was about to land on the tracks where I would have been severely injured by the moving boxcar's wheels. I managed to hook my arm on the next to last rung of the ladder on the side of the car and stopped about 6 inches from the ground. I don't know how it worked, but it did. My friends all thought I was going to be terminated. I survived. Story 32. As an RN who works back and forth between the ICU and the ER, I don't even know where to start. A 20-year-old male arrived after being injured by a shotgun, allegedly while he was cleaning it. The blast caused extensive damage to his lungs. How the vital organs were spared enough for him to survive is still my most amazing "how did he not pass away" moment. There are 2 large lakes in our area, and it's rare that a season goes by without someone arriving at the ER because they cliff jump without checking the water depth first. An older gentleman on a riding mower had an issue with the belt driving the blades. For some inexplicable reason, he reached down with the clutch engaged. The belt caught his hand and pulled it through the pulleys, causing him to jump off the mower, which then ran over him. Fortunately, the blades were not turning. In the end, all he lost was part of one finger. You know those binary exploding targets? Well, one of our fine customers had the brilliant idea to place a thick sheet of metal, about 2 to 3 centimeters thick and 30 centimeters square, over the top of one and have his buddy stand on it. They claimed to have tested it with a cinder block on top so they knew it would be safe. The buddy ended up with a severe open fracture of the femur, and due to the remote location, he was close to a life-threatening state upon arrival. He lived, but I'm fairly certain he now walks with a limp. One of our RFB patients attempted to retrieve the object on his own with a coat hanger, managed to perforate his bowels, and nearly passed away from the resulting infection. There are more, but these are some of the more interesting ones. Anyone who works in healthcare probably has a list of similar experiences. Story 33. We were on a family holiday in France. My youngest brother was probably around 6 years old. I don't remember exactly. My strongest memory of that holiday is him not realizing you need to look the opposite way than you do at home, UK, and running out in front of a double-decker bus. My dad had some insane parental instincts. He grabbed my brother by his collar, pulled him back, and practically flipped him over his head to safety, with only millimeters between him and the bus. We were all panicking, but my brother was just furious at my dad and completely oblivious to the near miss. That same brother had to be rescued multiple times as a toddler due to his love of eating snails. And once, when he was around 10, he broke his collarbone and never told anyone he'd fallen or that he was in pain. It took almost 3 days for my parents to figure it out and get him to the doctor. Story 34. When my mom was undergoing intensive cancer treatment, there was a day when I was the only one home with her. I was in college at the time. She had just come back from using the restroom and all of a sudden something went horribly wrong. We later found out multiple clots from her legs had broken loose and traveled to her lungs. As I sat there waiting for the ambulance, there was nothing I could do. I was certain this was a life-threatening moment. I still remember the look of absolute panic in her eyes as her severely weakened body struggled desperately to gasp for air. It was a horrifying situation. She survived that specific incident, but she didn't survive the cancer. Story 35. It was the 4th of July party in college at a friend's house. A friend of another friend brought fireworks and hopped over the balcony onto the cliffs overlooking the beach, thinking he would set off the fireworks there, pointing away from the house. He used this tube and the device ended up backfiring and exploding near his face. He nearly rolled off the cliff and I was horrified that someone might be severely injured right in front of us. But my friend jumped over the rail and caught him. I've never seen such quick reflexes. Luckily, one person was sober and drove him to the ER. He ended up with minor burns, but it could have been so much worse. He earned the nickname Rocket Man. Story 36. He didn't nearly pass away, but it remains one of the stupidest severe injuries I've ever witnessed. I'm old enough that we used to do metal work at school, resistance materials class. There was a lad called James who was always trying to get people to dare him to do stupid things. In this particular class, we were polishing some metal executive toys we had been making. The silly fellow asked anyone near if they would dare him to polish his head on the massive high-speed metal polisher. We all immediately started telling him no because we knew what he was like, and then James had voluntarily sanded his head down to the skull on that thing. He then sat down with everyone staring at him in stunned panic and quietly said, "I don't think that was a good idea." It was certainly not a good idea. When he eventually came back to school, he had a noticeable pale square on his head that was a result of a skin graft from his thigh. I often wonder if he ever made it to adulthood but can't remember his surname to look him up. Story 37. They jumped from the wrong spot and almost themselves on the rebar under the water. We stopped jumping off bridges after that. We were just dumb latchkey kids. It was 2008 and everyone's parents were busy working and getting mandated for overtime. Summer had just barely started and the water was still ice cold from the snowmelt. We decided to swim out by the bridge on the train tracks. You have to jump from a very specific spot because the water is full of debris and they just wouldn't listen. We watched them jump, collectively held our breath, and got ready to run a mile down the tracks to alert an adult. We had one singular cell phone in the entire group and it didn't have service out there. It was honestly terrifying in the moment and really put into perspective how alone we were when we trekked into the woods or down the tracks. Story 38. I'm a firefighter and I've seen the post-incident action from poor choices. One that sticks out was a substance user who packed all of his possessions into his car and then headed up the highway completely intoxicated. He ran a red light at approximately 60 miles an hour and severely hit an SUV. The impact nearly ripped the SUV in half, spinning it 270 degrees into a pole. The car rolled onto its left side, hit a median, and rolled end over end across the roofs of 2 cars that were turning left. His car landed on its roof and was completely crushed down to the windowsills. Everything in his car was thrown across the highway and the adjacent parking lot. When we arrived, it looked like a scene of utter destruction. There were people running everywhere, car parts, wheels, axles, engine block, glass, a bent light pole, and lots of leaking fluids. The man who caused the crash barely escaped his car, but with major injuries, I believe head trauma, broken ribs, and a punctured lung. 6 people were transported to the hospital and 3 were flown from there to a trauma center. Somehow, no one passed away. I couldn't believe it. The story we got in the months after the accident through updates was that the man made a heroic effort to get clean and to try to make amends to the people he injured, especially the young couple in the SUV. After a few years, I found out he became a substance misuse counselor. So that to me is one hell of a turnaround. Story 39. When I was little, I liked to climb things. When I was in the stage where I sometimes crawled and sometimes walked, my mom had me secured in a playpen in my parents' bedroom upstairs while she was hanging laundry in the garden. I'm told I grabbed all the toys I could find in the playpen, piled them up to climb out of the pen, then dragged the chair from the dresser to the window, climbed onto the chair, and then onto the windowsill. My grandma, who was also in the garden, our family has 3 houses on a shared lot, saw me lounging on the outside windowsill. She screamed, and she and my mom ran upstairs to get me. Story 40. One morning, I was at my home airport very early before the tower opened to grab a coffee and wait out the morning fog. I saw a man load himself, 3 other men, and some luggage into a Cessna 172. They would have been overloaded, even with minimal fuel. The man attempted a takeoff but aborted. On the second attempt, he actually went onto the grass before the runway threshold to give himself a little extra space, and this was on a 5,000-foot runway. The last I saw of that plane was it struggling to climb into the air after spending a long time low over the ground gaining speed, before disappearing into the fog. I was sure that I was going to read about a crash, but apparently they made it. Story 41. I was one of those people. This was in the summer of 2019. In a freak accident, I tripped while setting up the patio at an old job and ended up falling about 8 feet straight down onto the pavement. I never got the injury medically examined because I was uninsured. I ended up with damage to my neck and left eye, plus 2 nerve injuries that caused chronic pain. Based on the bruising afterward, I likely fractured my orbital bone. I probably came within a few inches of landing at an angle that could have been fatal. I remember watching the ground get closer as I fell. Story 42. Technically, I didn't witness it, but I heard my dad trip coming up the stairs while intoxicated. I then heard him slide all the way back down them and break the glass panel at the bottom with his head. I then heard him get up and start wandering around as if he was fine. This left an absolute mess, and the next morning, as a head wound and strolling around the living room are not a good combination. He then put up a shockingly passionate argument that he did not need an ambulance, and my mom was being dramatic for thinking he did. He was completely fine after a very fast ambulance ride and some stitches later. If I recall correctly, he was more upset about the glass panel being expensive to replace. Story 43. It was a wintertime hike on an icy mountain. My hungover self only just managed to enjoy the incredible view at the peak. On the way down, my brother decided to save the effort of walking and slide on his parka instead. He was unable to stop and was quickly heading toward a sheer drop of at least 100 meters. Our whole party stood and looked on in horror. In the end, he managed to brake before the slope became too steep and slowly moved his way sideways to safety, awkwardly hugging the incline. Don't mess with Arctic wilderness, not on a calm, beautiful sunny day, not ever. Toward the end of the hike, I took perhaps the most epic snapshot ever. That same brother was kicking an upright rock formation in the hope that it would break. No one thought it would happen, but I have a perfectly timed photo with the rock tilting at an angle but still touching the base. My brother's foot on the piece and his face contorted with determination. The guy first beat the mountain, then broke the mountain. That's probably not healthy for his perception of the power ranking of the two. Story 44. I'm a park ranger and I recently watched a fellow ranger nearly take a chainsaw to the face. I'll begin by saying that this guy probably has twice as many hours running a saw as any other member of our staff, but complacency can be dangerous. Had he not been drinking enough water, he was hot, he was tired, and this was the last tree we were cutting before lunch break. There was a limb he needed to trim off before making the main felling cuts. For whatever reason, he used the first 4 inches of the saw to cut the climb. We call that the kickback zone. It started to cut, but then caught the wood, rolled over the end of the bar, and flew up straight toward his head. He was barely able to stop it. The chain came so close that at first I thought it had actually hit him, and I ran over to administer first aid. A couple of beard hairs were caught in the chain and it took a chunk from the brim of his helmet. He turned pale and sat down with his mouth open in shock. We came back to that tree after lunch. The safest way to operate a chainsaw is to assume that the saw and the tree are actively conspiring to injure you at every moment. Story 45. As teenagers, my friends and I used to go to a nearby theme park with a bunch of roller coasters. We would try to trick the attendants into thinking the main safety bar was secured when it wasn't, and then remove the seatbelt after the ride started moving. The game was to lock your hands and feet onto something and hold yourself in through the whole ride. It was the kind of plan only 15-year-olds could be foolish enough to attempt. However, one of the guys in the seat in front of me nearly fell out. He was holding himself down, but during one part of the coaster that involved a sideways spiral, he suddenly slipped out the side. Luckily, the friend next to him grabbed him in time to keep him from falling all the way out. Both those guys were white as ghosts getting off that ride, and to my knowledge, none of us ever did it again. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.